Are you ready to embark on a journey full of unexpected twists and turns? Join us in this thrilling tale of a grieving father who discovers the Son of Gnosis, a powerful tool that can bring his daughter back to life. But as he uses its teachings to revive his daughter, he unwittingly unleashes a darkness that threatens to consume everything he holds dear. Follow John and his wife as they battle the darkness and navigate the consequences of their actions. Don't miss out on this gripping novel, filled with exceptional dialogue and unexpected events that will keep you speechless until the very end. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date. Chapter 1: The Discovery. John sat in his living room, staring at the empty chair where his daughter used to sit. It had been 6 months since she died, but the pain still felt fresh. He had tried everything to numb the ache, but nothing worked, until he discovered the Son of Gnosis. The book was ancient, with a leather cover and pages that were yellowed with age. It was said to contain powerful teachings that could change one's life forever. John had stumbled upon it in a small bookstore in the city, and the owner had told him that it was a rare find. As he read through the book, he found himself drawn to a particular chapter that spoke of a resurrection spell. The idea of bringing his daughter back to life filled him with hope, but he was also hesitant. Was it even possible? And at what cost? John knew he had to try. He began to gather the ingredients listed in the book and follow the instructions carefully. The process was long and arduous, but he persevered. Finally, he chanted the incantation and waited for the spell to take effect. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the room, and John felt a chill run down his spine. He turned to the chair where his daughter used to sit, and there she was, looking at him with eyes that were both familiar and strange. "Father," she said, her voice low and hoarse. "What have you done?" Chapter 2: The Return. John couldn't believe his eyes. His daughter was standing before him, alive once again. He ran to her, embracing her tightly as tears streamed down his face. But as he pulled away, he noticed something different about her. She was pale, her skin almost translucent, and her eyes had an otherworldly gleam to them. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I feel strange," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm alive." John didn't know what to do. He had brought his daughter back to life, but at what cost? He looked back at the Son of Gnosis and read through the chapter on resurrection again. There was a warning at the bottom of the page. "Beware of the darkness that may follow." He couldn't ignore the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of his stomach. He decided to keep a close eye on his daughter, hoping that it was just the shock of being brought back to life that was affecting her. Over the next few days, John noticed that his daughter was becoming more and more withdrawn. She spoke less, and when she did, it was in a monotone voice that sent shivers down his spine. He tried to engage her in conversation, but she would only give one-word answers. One night, John woke up to find his daughter standing at the foot of his bed. Her eyes were glowing in the dark, and she was muttering something under her breath. When he tried to approach her, she vanished into thin air. John knew then that something was very wrong. He had to figure out what was happening to his daughter before it was too late. Chapter 3: The Research. John spent the next few days researching everything he could about resurrection spells and the consequences that followed. He went through countless books and websites, trying to find a solution to his daughter's strange behavior. But nothing seemed to make sense. He began to feel like he was losing his mind. Was his daughter really back from the dead? Or was it all just a hallucination? He couldn't tell anymore. One night, John was visited by a strange figure in his dream. It was a woman, with long dark hair and piercing blue eyes. She was dressed in a flowing white gown and held a book in her hands. "John," she said, her voice echoing through the darkness, "you have meddled with forces beyond your understanding. The darkness that follows resurrection spells cannot be tamed." John woke up with a start, covered in sweat. He knew then that he had to find a way to reverse the spell before it was too late. But how? He went back to the Son of Gnosis and read through the chapter on resurrection once again. There, at the bottom of the page, was a small footnote that he had missed before. To reverse the spell, one must make a sacrifice of equal value. John knew what he had to do. He had to sacrifice something of equal value to his daughter's life to undo the spell. But what could he give up that was worth as much as his daughter's life? Chapter 4. The Sacrifice. John spent the next few days in a haze, trying to come up with a solution to his daughter's condition. He knew what he had to do, but he didn't know if he had the strength to go through with it. One day, he was walking through the park when he saw a young girl playing with a balloon. The girl reminded him so much of his daughter, and he felt a surge of emotion wash over him. He knew then what he had to do. John went to the nearest store and bought a bunch of balloons. He went back to the park and sat down on a bench, holding the balloons in his hands. The little girl who reminded him of his daughter came over to him, curious. "Would you like a balloon?" John asked, his voice shaking. The girl nodded, and John gave her a balloon. He watched as she ran off, laughing and playing with the balloon. John closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. He went back to his house, took out a knife, and made the sacrifice. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but he knew it was for the best. As soon as he had completed the sacrifice, he felt a weight lifted off his shoulders. He knew that the spell had been broken. He went to his daughter's room and found her lying in bed, sleeping peacefully. He watched her for a few moments, his heart filled with love and relief. But as he turned to leave the room, he saw a dark figure standing in the corner. It was the same woman from his dream. "You have made a grave mistake," she said, her voice cold and menacing. "The darkness has been unleashed." Chapter 5. The Darkness Unleashed. John stood frozen in fear as the dark figure in his daughter's room spoke those ominous words. He knew that he had made a terrible mistake, but he had no idea what was coming next. Suddenly, the room began to shake violently. John stumbled and fell to the ground, trying to hold on to something to steady himself. The window shattered, and a gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles on the bedside table. As the darkness crept closer, John saw his daughter's eyes snap open, her expression turning cold and empty. She sat up in bed and stared at him, her eyes filled with a sinister glow. "Father," she said, her voice sounding distant and cold. "You have brought me back from the dead, but at what cost? What have you sacrificed to make this possible?" John couldn't speak. He knew that he had made a terrible mistake, and now his daughter was lost to him forever. The darkness continued to spread, engulfing the room and everything in it. John watched in horror as his daughter transformed into a creature of darkness, her body contorting and twisting into an unrecognizable shape. He tried to run, but the darkness was everywhere. He stumbled and fell, his body crashing to the ground. As he lay there, helpless and defeated, he heard a voice whisper in his ear, "This is your punishment, John. You should have let her rest in peace." Chapter 6. The Descent. John woke up to darkness. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel the cold, hard ground beneath him. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. He heard a low, menacing growl somewhere in the darkness, and he knew that he was not alone. He strained his eyes, trying to make out anything in the darkness. Suddenly, a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, and John could feel a cold breath on his face. "Welcome to the underworld," a voice said, echoing through the darkness. John realized with horror that he had descended into the realm of the dead. He had been dragged down here by the darkness that had consumed his daughter. He tried to call out, but his voice was weak and hoarse. He knew that he had to find a way out of this place before it was too late. He began to crawl, his hands and knees scraping against the hard ground. The growling sound grew louder, and John could hear something slithering towards him. He turned around and saw a pack of shadowy creatures, their glowing eyes fixed on him. They looked like twisted versions of the animals he had seen in the park, and they moved with a deadly grace. John knew that he was no match for them, but he refused to give up. He struggled to his feet and ran as fast as he could, trying to escape the creatures that pursued him. He ran through the darkness, not knowing where he was going. He could hear the creatures getting closer, their growls and snarls filling the air. Suddenly, he saw a glimmer of light in the distance. He ran towards it, hoping that it was a way out. As he got closer, he realized that it was a door, and he threw himself against it with all his might. The door creaked open, and John stumbled out into the light. Chapter 7: The Price of Life. John found himself standing in the middle of a crowded street. He looked around, trying to make sense of where he was. The street was lined with people going about their business, but something was off. They all seemed to be moving in slow motion, their movements jerky and unnatural. As he watched, a woman walking towards him suddenly froze in mid-step. Her eyes went blank, and she began to scream. John realized with horror that he was in a different world now, a world between life and death. The price he had paid to bring his daughter back to life had brought him to this place. He knew that he had to find a way back to the world of the living, but he had no idea how. He wandered the streets, looking for some clue or sign. As he walked, he saw glimpses of his old life. He saw his wife, crying in their bedroom. He saw his friends, gathered around a table, raising their glasses in a toast. But all of it was just a memory now, a ghost of the life he had lost. He wandered for what felt like hours, but he was no closer to finding a way out. The people around him continued to move in slow motion, trapped in their own little worlds. Suddenly, he saw a figure in the distance. It was a young girl with dark hair and bright eyes. She was looking at him, beckoning him towards her. John felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the way out. He ran towards her, calling out her name. As he got closer, he realized with horror that it was his daughter. But she looked different now, her eyes filled with a dark, ominous glow. "Father," she said, her voice cold and distant. "You brought me back to life, but at what cost? You have condemned us both to this place, this world between life and death." John felt a cold hand close around his heart. He knew that his mistake had cost him everything. Chapter 8: The Bargain. John fell to his knees, his heart heavy with guilt and despair. He had brought his daughter back to life, but at a terrible cost. He looked up at her, hoping that there was some way to fix what he had done. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "There is a way out," his daughter said, her voice now filled with a strange, otherworldly power. "But you must make a bargain." John felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that bargaining with the powers of the underworld was dangerous, but he had no other choice. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I want you to give me your life," his daughter said. "In exchange, I will guide you back to the world of the living." John's heart sank. He knew that this was a terrible price to pay, but he also knew that he could not leave his daughter here, trapped in the world between life and death. He nodded, steeling himself for the sacrifice he would have to make. "Very well," he said. "I will give you my life, if it means that we can return to the world of the living." His daughter nodded, and a strange, dark energy began to fill the air around them. John felt his body grow weak, his strength draining away. He knew that this was the end, but he felt a strange sense of peace. He had made a terrible mistake, but he had also done everything in his power to fix it. As his vision began to fade, he saw a faint glimmer of light in the distance. He knew that it was the way back to the world of the living. He closed his eyes, feeling his daughter's hand on his shoulder. He knew that he was not alone, and that he had made the right choice. Chapter 9: The Return. John opened his eyes, gasping for air. He was back in the world of the living. He looked around, disoriented and confused. He was lying on the floor of his living room, surrounded by his wife and friends. They looked at him with concern, asking him what had happened. John struggled to speak, trying to find the words to explain what he had been through. I brought our daughter back to life," he said, his voice shaking. "But it came at a terrible cost. I had to make a bargain with something dark and powerful." His wife looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "What did you do?" she asked. I gave my life," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a stunned silence in the room. No one knew what to say or do. Suddenly, John felt a strange energy fill the air around him. He looked up, seeing a faint glimmer of light in the distance. He knew that it was his daughter, guiding him back to the world of the dead. But he also knew that he could not leave his family behind. He had to find a way to break the bargain, to save himself and his daughter. He stood up, his body weak but determined. "I have to go back," he said, his voice firm. "I have to find a way to break the bargain." His wife and friends looked at him with concern, but he knew that he had to do this. He turned and ran towards the light, feeling his daughter's presence beside him. He knew that he was not alone, and that he would find a way to set things right. Chapter 10: The Plan. John ran towards the light, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that he had to find a way to break the bargain he had made with the dark powers that had brought his daughter back to life. He felt her presence beside him, a strange, otherworldly energy that gave him strength. As they approached the end of the tunnel, John saw a figure waiting for him. It was a tall, thin man with dark hair and piercing eyes. "I am the keeper of the bargain," the man said, his voice cold and emotionless. "You cannot break the deal." John felt a surge of anger and frustration. He had come too far to be stopped now. "I have to try," he said, his voice shaking with determination. "I cannot leave my family behind, and I cannot let my daughter be consumed by darkness." The keeper of the bargain looked at him, his eyes narrowing. "Very well," he said, "but you will have to pay a price." John knew that he had no choice. He would do whatever it took to save his daughter and break the bargain. "What is the price?" he asked, his voice steady. The keeper of the bargain leaned in close, whispering a single word in John's ear. John felt a chill run down his spine. The price was steep, but he knew that he had to pay it. He nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. He turned to his daughter, seeing the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. "It's going to be okay," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. "We're going to find a way to fix this." Together, they began to formulate a plan. Chapter 11. The Sacrifice. John and his daughter worked tirelessly day and night, trying to find a way to break the bargain that had brought her back from the dead. They pored over ancient tomes and arcane texts, searching for any clue or hint that could lead them to a solution. As they worked, John felt the weight of the price he had agreed to pay. It was a terrible sacrifice, one that he knew would change him forever. But he was determined to see it through, to save his daughter and his family from the darkness that threatened to consume them. Finally, after weeks of research and experimentation, they found a possible solution. It was risky and dangerous, but it was their only hope. They would have to perform a ritual, a complex and powerful spell that would sever the connection between his daughter and the dark powers that had brought her back to life. But the ritual required a sacrifice. John knew what he had to do. He prepared himself, mentally and emotionally, for what was to come. As the night of the ritual approached, John said his goodbyes to his family, knowing that he may never see them again. He stood before the altar, his daughter beside him, and began to recite the ancient incantations. As the ritual reached its climax, John felt a surge of power flow through him. He knew that it was working, but he also knew that the price was about to be paid. He closed his eyes, feeling a searing pain tear through his body. When he opened them again, he was no longer in the world of the living. But he could sense that his daughter was free, that the darkness had been banished. He knew that his sacrifice had not been in vain. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. The days following the ritual were filled with uncertainty and fear for John's family. They had lost him, but his daughter was alive, and the darkness that had threatened to consume her was gone. But they were also left to grapple with the consequences of the ritual and John's sacrifice. John's wife and son mourned his loss, while his daughter struggled to come to terms with the fact that her father had given his life to save hers. As they sat in the quiet of their home, John's daughter began to notice strange things happening around her. Objects would move on their own, doors would creak open and shut, and a cold wind seemed to follow her wherever she went. At first, she was frightened, but then she began to sense her father's presence. It was as if he was still watching over her, protecting her from beyond the grave. As the days turned into weeks, John's daughter began to feel a sense of peace and acceptance. She knew that her father had made the ultimate sacrifice for her, and that she would honor his memory by living a life of kindness and goodness. The darkness that had threatened to consume her had been banished, and she was free to live the life that her father had always wanted for her. And although John was no longer with them in the physical world, his family knew that he was still with them in spirit, watching over them and guiding them through the trials and tribulations of life. Chapter 13. A New Beginning. Months had passed since John's sacrifice, and his family had begun to heal. They had come to terms with his loss, and had found a sense of peace in the knowledge that he had given his life to save their daughter. John's wife had taken up his passion for gardening, and had transformed their backyard into a beautiful oasis, filled with vibrant flowers and lush greenery. His son had thrown himself into his studies, determined to make his father proud. And John's daughter had become an advocate for mental health awareness, determined to help others who were struggling with the darkness that had threatened to consume her. One day, as they sat together in the garden, John's daughter felt a warm breeze wash over her. She knew, without a doubt, that it was her father's spirit coming to visit her once more. And as she closed her eyes and breathed in the sweet fragrance of the flowers, she knew that it was time for her to move on, to start a new chapter in her life. With a sense of peace and purpose, she stood up and walked towards the gate, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. John's family watched her go, their hearts filled with love and pride for the strong, resilient woman that she had become. And as they turned to each other, they knew that they would always carry John's memory with them as they embarked on their own new beginnings. Chapter 14. The Son of Gnosis. As John's daughter ventured out into the world, she couldn't help but think back to the teachings of the Son of Gnosis. She remembered the words that her father had spoken, the lessons that he had imparted to her, and the love that he had shown her. She knew that the Son of Gnosis had played a key role in her journey back from the darkness, and she wanted to share its teachings with others who were struggling with mental health issues. So, she began to research the Son of Gnosis, delving deeper into its philosophy and teachings. She read about the importance of self-awareness, mindfulness, and the power of positive thinking. She learned about the power of meditation and began to incorporate it into her daily routine. And as she continued to explore the Son of Gnosis, she began to realize that it held the key to not only overcoming her own struggles, but also to helping others do the same. So, she began to reach out to others who were struggling with mental health issues, sharing with them the wisdom of the Son of Gnosis and helping them to find their own path to healing and happiness. As she helped others, she found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that she had never known before. And as she looked back on her journey, she knew that her father would be proud of the woman that she had become and of the impact that she was making in the world. Chapter 15. The Dark Return. While John's daughter was out in the world, helping others and finding her own purpose, a dark presence began to stir back at home. In the months since John's sacrifice, his wife had begun to notice strange occurrences around the house. Objects would move on their own, doors would open and close by themselves, and she often felt a cold presence lurking just out of sight. At first, she tried to dismiss it as her imagination, a trick of the light, or a faulty door hinge. But as the occurrences became more frequent and more intense, she began to suspect that something more sinister was at play. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. She sat up, heart racing, and peered into the darkness. And then she saw it, a figure, shrouded in darkness, standing just outside her door. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her throat. The figure began to move towards her, and she knew that it meant her harm. As the figure reached out to touch her, she felt a surge of power course through her. It was a power that she had never felt before, a power that she knew had come from John's sacrifice. With a fierce determination, she pushed back against the figure, driving it back and banishing it from her home. And as she collapsed back onto her bed, heart racing and breath ragged, she knew that the darkness had not yet been fully vanquished. Chapter 16. The Unveiling. As John's wife struggled to fend off the darkness that threatened to consume her, she knew that she needed to uncover the truth behind its origin. She began to delve deeper into the Son of Gnosis, hoping to find answers in its teachings. And then she found it, a passage that spoke of a powerful spell, one that could bring the dead back to life. It was a spell that had been lost to time, and one that was said to come with great danger and sacrifice. But John's wife knew that it was the only way to uncover the truth behind the darkness that had consumed her home. So, she began to research the spell, poring over ancient tomes and texts in search of its secrets. And finally, after weeks of searching, she found it, the resurrection spell. She knew that it was a dangerous undertaking, one that could cost her everything. But she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. She gathered the necessary ingredients, performed the incantations, and waited. And then she heard it, a faint whisper, coming from the other side of the veil. She called out, and the whisper grew louder, until finally a figure began to materialize before her. It was John, but not as she remembered him. His eyes were dark, his skin pale, and there was a darkness that seemed to emanate from within him. She knew then that she had made a grave mistake, that the darkness had been waiting for a vessel to inhabit, and that she had unwittingly provided it with one. Chapter 17. The Confrontation. John's wife stared in horror at the figure that stood before her. It was her husband, but it was not the man she had known and loved. "John," she whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. The figure cocked its head, its eyes boring into her. "You should not have done this," it hissed, its voice cold and distant. "I just wanted to bring you back," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Bring me back?" the figure snarled. "You have no idea what you have done. You have given me the means to complete my plan." "What plan?" John's wife asked, taking another step forward. The figure stepped forward as well, its eyes blazing with an unearthly light. "The plan to bring about the end of everything," it said, "to consume this world with darkness and chaos." John's wife felt a coldness wash over her, and she knew then that she had made a terrible mistake. "But what can we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "There is only one way to stop me," the figure said. "You must destroy the son of Gnosis." "The son of Gnosis?" she repeated, confusion etched on her face. "It is the source of my power," the figure explained. "Destroy it, and I will be weakened. It is the only way to stop me." John's wife nodded, determination setting in. She knew that it was a dangerous undertaking, but she also knew that it was the only way to save the world. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I'll destroy the son of Gnosis." The figure smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent shivers down her spine. "Good," it said, "but be warned, it will not be easy. The sun is well protected, and there are those who will stop at nothing to keep it safe." John's wife nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, and with that, the figure vanished, leaving her alone in the darkness. Chapter 18. The journey begins. John's wife knew that she had to act fast if she was going to stop the darkness that threatened to consume the world. She gathered her things and set out on a journey to find the son of Gnosis. As she traveled, she encountered many dangers, from treacherous terrain to dangerous creatures. But she persevered, driven by a fierce determination to save the world. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. John's wife traveled through treacherous mountains, dense forests, and vast deserts. She encountered many people on her journey, some who offered to help her, and others who tried to stop her. But she remained focused, determined to reach her goal. Finally, after months of travel, she arrived at the foot of a great mountain. At its peak, she could see a faint glow, the telltale sign of the son of Gnosis. She set out to climb the mountain, determined to reach her goal. The climb was treacherous, but she persevered, driven by a fierce determination to save the world. Finally, after many hours of climbing, she reached the top of the mountain. There, she saw the son of Gnosis, a great orb of light that seemed to pulse with power. But she also saw something else, a group of people standing guard around the sun. They were heavily armed, and they looked like they would stop at nothing to protect the sun. John's wife knew that she had to act fast. She took a deep breath and then charged forward, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. Chapter 19. The Battle for the Sun. John's wife charged forward, ready to face the guards who stood between her and the son of Gnosis. As she drew closer, she could see that they were heavily armed and that they looked like they would stop at nothing to protect the sun. She drew her sword and shouted, "I demand to speak with the person in charge." One of the guards stepped forward and said, "No one is allowed near the son of Gnosis. You must leave now." John's wife refused to back down. "I have come too far to be turned away now. I need the son of Gnosis to save the world." The guard looked at her skeptically. "You expect us to believe that?" "It's the truth," John's wife said. "Please, let me speak with someone in charge." The guard hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Fine, but you'll have to leave your sword here." John's wife reluctantly handed over her sword and followed the guard into a nearby tent. Inside, she found a man who looked like he was in charge. "I'm here to ask for your help," she said. The man looked at her coldly. "And why should we help you?" "Because the world is in danger," John's wife said. "The darkness is spreading, and it's only a matter of time before it consumes everything." The man sighed. "We know about the darkness. That's why we're guarding the son of Gnosis. But we can't just give it to anyone who asks for it." "I understand that," John's wife said. "But I have a plan. I know how to use the son of Gnosis to stop the darkness. Please let me try." The man considered her words for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. We'll let you try. But if you fail, we'll be forced to take the sun back." John's wife nodded, then headed towards the son of Gnosis. She could feel the power radiating from it, and she knew that it held the key to saving the world. But as she approached, she felt a chill run down her spine. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, the guards attacked. They came at her from all sides, their weapons flashing in the sunlight. John's wife fought back, but there were too many of them. She felt herself being overwhelmed, and she knew that she was in trouble. Just then, a figure stepped forward. It was John, her husband, and he was wielding a sword. "I won't let them hurt you," he said. Together, John and his wife fought back against the guards, their swords flashing in the sunlight. As they fought, John's wife realized something. The darkness wasn't just outside of them. It was within them too. They had to find a way to overcome it if they were going to succeed. Chapter 20. The Final Battle. John and his wife managed to fight off the guards, but they knew that they had to act quickly if they were going to stop the darkness from consuming everything. They made their way to the son of Gnosis and stood before it, unsure of what to do next. Suddenly, a voice spoke to them. It was the voice of the sun itself. "You have come seeking my power," the sun said. "But be warned, my power is great, and it can be dangerous in the wrong hands." "We know," John's wife said, "but we have a plan. We want to use your power to stop the darkness and save the world." The sun was silent for a moment, then spoke again. "Very well. I will lend you my power, but only if you promise to use it wisely." John and his wife nodded, and the sun's power flowed into them. They felt it coursing through their veins, filling them with a strength that they had never known before. Together, they set out to face the darkness. They could feel it closing in on them, threatening to consume everything they held dear. But they didn't give up. They fought back with all their might, using the sun's power to drive the darkness back. The battle raged on for what felt like hours. John and his wife fought with everything they had, determined to save the world. Finally, they emerged victorious. The darkness had been defeated, and the world was safe once again. But as they looked around at the destruction that had been wrought, they realized something. They had lost themselves in the process. The darkness had left its mark on them, and they knew that they would never be the same again. John's wife turned to him and said, "We did it, but at what cost?" John looked at her, knowing that she was right. "We have each other. That's all that matters." They embraced, holding on to each other tightly. They had survived the battle, but they knew that there was still much work to be done. And so they set out, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date on the latest captivating stories.